For years, you have heard the complaint security always slows things down and gets in the way of productive work. This friction costs. Is security ready to save, not cost? Hello, with the latest installment of IDSA webinars, I'm Geoff Rich, Executive Director of the Identity Defined Security Alliance. Welcome to those joining live, and as always, a time-traveling welcome to everyone watching this recording. Thank you for taking the time to spend with us. At this live broadcast time, we are just 63 days. We're barreling towards the 1/4 mark of the 21st century. I always want to remind everyone of that because it's sometimes not a concept that's not easy for everyone to pick up. It helps us to know that we are just in time to grant access without slowing down engineers. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Today's guests are going to have a great discussion on that. But first, some of our regular housekeeping. The IDSA is a nonprofit that provides thought leadership, expertise, and guidance. We offer vendor-neutral research, education, and best practices that help organizations like yours to reduce the risk of an identity-related attack. We couldn't exist without our members, represented here on the right. Membership is open to identity and security vendors, as well as every company and practitioner committed to the vision of an identity-centric approach to security. Membership categories range from contributing member to identity vendor and everything in between. Thank you to all of our members. Our 2025 Trends in Digital Identity report is ready. It was published in September, and you can get your own copy at this URL, or let everyone know that you really trust us and use the QR code that we have here, and you don't have to do any typing. Remember, members get access to all of the raw data from the research, as well as the demographics and crosstabs for this report, not just the public report. Everyone gets a public report. Members get all the data, and there's a lot there that didn't make it to the public report. That's just another benefit of IDSA membership. Now, this session is being recorded, so share it with everyone that will benefit from viewing it, please. Leading today's conversation is member company P0. Kelsey Brazil, the head of product marketing there, joined P0 a few months ago and brings a strong background in product marketing. Kelsey's guest is Geoff Harcourt, the Chief Technology Officer at CommonLit. Geoff continues to build on his strong technical background as he approaches the 8-year mark with CommonLit. You can see Kelsey and Geoff's LinkedIn sites and their company websites in the attachment section of this webinar, as well as some other valuable information that I know they're going to talk about during the webinar. And you can download all of that during the webinar. I recommend you do. So with all of that in place, Kelsey, did we get you here just in time?
Thank you, Geoff. Yes, you definitely did. And we're grateful for it. It's always a pleasure to speak with this community. And just want to kick off with a few words about myself. I've spent the last decade or so of my career working at cybersecurity technology companies that are trying to solve the multitude of issues that security teams and practitioners are juggling on a day-to-day basis. So everything from credential stuffing to SaaS security, and now with P0, looking at how teams manage privileged access to their production environments. And the reason I was so excited to join this team, as Geoff mentioned, I'm a few months in here. But as all of you can attest, the identity security space is a noisy one. There's a lot of problems and even more vendors trying to solve them. So to have the opportunity to work with a team that was focusing on such an acute, tangible pain point that could be solved, and almost one of the last relics of the cloud modernization world, last frontiers, that really needed to be brought into today's way of doing business, and especially of managing of how developers work with privileged access management was super exciting. So happy to be here today talking about that with all of you, and really pleased to be joined by Geoff from CommonLit. one of our favorite customers. They're all our favorite, but Geoff, today you're our extra favorite. And I want to hand it over to you here to tell us a little bit about CommonLit and your team, and then we can get into the nitty gritty.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks for the intro. My name is Geoff Harcourt. I'm the CTO at CommonLit. We're a 501c3 nonprofit that delivers a rigorous literacy curriculum to millions of students around the world. I've been at CommonLit for about 8 years, and during my time here, we've transitioned from being a supplementary tool, something that teachers sort of use as test prep or homework or maybe some extra supplementary work in the classroom, to a true core curriculum that's serving school districts all around the United States. During my time at CommonLit, we've done a lot to ratchet up our security posture. North Carolina passed a law a couple years ago that essentially requires you to have a SOC 2 audit in order to hold student data. And as part of that pursuit, we started to do some extra measures to ramp up our security further, including moving to just-in-time provisioning for certain kinds of access. So it's been really exciting to work with these kinds of tools and to really feel like we've built a strong posture, as stewards of the data of millions of students.
Great. Thank you, Geoff. And I think when we first started talking about what we wanted to share today and planning for this webinar, you made a comment around the likes of, I don't even remember life before JIT, I think was a direct quote. But I'm going to ask you to try here and talk us through, you mentioned SOC 2, but what were some of the compelling events or pain points that you were feeling, or things that made this a really important kind of next step for your team?
Yeah, when I first arrived at CommonLit, the engineers on the team fell into one of two camps. They were either the admins who had access to everything all the time, or they were line engineers who had access to nothing unless they were like specially granted privileges, and then those privileges had to be cleaned up later. During the first couple of years as a CommonLit, we did a pretty dramatic reworking of our IAM policies and Amazon Web Services, as well as certain kinds of access to other production services. And during that time, we sort of got into a phase where we had special groups that you could be awarded by the admins for access if you needed access to a service for debugging or for a temporary project. But it really hamstrung us, because if you needed something urgently, you had to find one of the admins. We're a small team. I really don't like situations where if people go on vacation, they've got the looming threat of being dragged back into work. So that was a problem for us. There were bottlenecks, there were slowdowns. It also led to a situation where the administrators themselves had overly broad access when they often didn't need it, which in and of itself is a little stressful. And one of the things that we talked about in our team is that when we have restricted access to various systems to engineers, we're not doing it because we don't trust the engineers. We're doing it because if something happens to that engineer's credentials, we want to contain the blast damage, so people can just be less stressed in general about whatever access they have or don't have.
Was that a misconception, Geoff, that's what the mistrust there, was that something you had to overcome?
Not really. I just wanted to explain to people why we were ratcheting things. And I think at first when we started building these policies and these like role related groups, it felt a little bit clumsy, because we would sort of add and remove these things. We were a small team. Like, we've never had more than 13 engineers in CommonLit at any given time. So it felt like we had like a very high touch, overly bureaucratic process in order to take care of giving people access to various systems. And the other thing is that as a small team, we also didn't have a dedicated security engineer. So we didn't have anyone who was going back to necessarily make sure that access had been removed. And it's very easy in some cases to not notice that there's dangling access on systems. So For those of you who read the book Moneyball, I often describe our software team as sort of being like the Oakland A's, where we're trying to do a lot with a not very big budget. And so, we wanted to find ways that we could have a really strong security posture, and not just also have a security posture that allowed us to demonstrate to our customers who were curious that we were exhibiting strong security. We wanted to be able to do those things without doing something that would, destroy our nonprofit budget, or things that would just be so complicated that we would essentially turn into a security shop instead of into a curriculum shop, which is really what we want to be.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I like that you just casually likened yourself. I think you're Brad Pitt in that analogy, right?
Yeah, I guess I did turn myself into Brad Pitt or Billy Bean in that scenario. So, we had the start of how we did this was with IAM policies that we would, or IAM policies that would be assigned to groups, and then we would assign those groups or remove those groups. We'd also sometimes put the credentials for certain important systems into vaults in our 1Password vault, and then we, selectively share them and then rotate them as necessary as we moved around. And you can just see that like all of those things end up they require manual effort in order to maintain them. And I think when things like that require manual effort, they often end up having holes where something's dangling or something wasn't taken care of. I invest a lot of effort in trying to make sure that the experience of being an engineer at CommonLit is as pleasant as possible. We don't, as a nonprofit, we're not at the top of the salary curve. And so I just want every part of the job to be like maximum enjoyment, maximum output, and like minimum bureaucratic hassle. So a lot of the work that we had done to strengthen our security posture started to introduce some friction where it felt like things were, there's just the lag time sometimes when you needed to get something, if I wasn't around or if another admin on the team wasn't around, was substandard. So we started to think about what kinds of things we could do to do a better job.
And then if you're thinking more broadly, like outside of maybe CommonLit and, other experiences that you have, like what are some of, I think we have a combination of folks on the line here that maybe haven't thought about this, or maybe they're trying to solve it in-house with some like a homegrown solution, or they're trying to use, I think it's like 5 to 8 tools on average that teams have in their identity stack. What are some like just broader pain points or pitfalls that you would call out for folks on the line?
Yeah, I think you want a solution where you can audit the changes that got made. So some way that you can actually get good reporting. And I know you can pull information about who had what groups from, logs in AWS, for example, but it's not a very streamlined process to do that in a way that's easy to audit, easy to look through. For us, like one of the huge benefits of doing like a JIT-based approach wasn't just that we could award the access quickly, but also like an assurance that the access was getting removed, which for compliance purposes is almost as important as the actual award itself. Another thing is we really did not want to home build a solution to do all this stuff. So we wanted something that plugged into all of our existing systems and leveraged the security and the functionality of, our identity provider, of our, cloud computing provider, of our version control. We wanted all of those things to be leveraged and not to build sort of parallel or supplementary systems on the outside. We only have 9 engineers, and I want those engineers working on things that improve literacy outcomes for students. I don't want them working on security infrastructure that's something that we could easily acquire.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. We had some pretty clear things that we wanted to do with just-in-time access. So the first thing, the most important systems for us to have really prompt access awards were for Amazon Web Services and GitHub. So all of our production services run in AWS. And what we've done now is that our engineers have a base level of access that gives them read-only access to a large swath of systems. And then when they need to read sensitive systems or when they need to make configuration changes, they ask for an award in our JIT tool. We're using P0, so they'll ask for the award, and then a second engineer reviews the request and then approves it. Similar with GitHub, our branch protection rules are set up for SOC 2, so we have a rule that no engineer can merge without passing CI and without code review by someone who wasn't the author. And so being able to, if you're the on-call engineer and it's after hours and no one else is around and you can't get a code review, or there's some extremely urgent hotfix, this sort of thing doesn't happen that often to us, but when it does happen, it's a really big deal. We want to get things fixed really quickly. And so being able to get yourself added to a GitHub team, so that you can make the hotfix changes and bypass our normal branch protection rules is a really valuable feature. The other thing about this is that our team sort of lives in Slack during the day. So being able to have the approvals, notify people in Slack, and give people the ability to use a Slack workflow in order to approve or reject the access change. Also, one of the nice things about doing the JIT access is that in addition to looking at the access reason, keeping that reason for audit purposes, keeping track of who awarded it, we're also able to set the time frame that access award will be. So most engineers are asking for special access for something like 1 to 4 hours. Occasionally, like if someone's going to do a big migration over a weekend and we know that they're going to need recurring access for something, we might say 48 hours. But I would say 9 out of 10 access requests that we award are for, something like 30 minutes to 2 hours in terms of how long they're awarded. Having this access lets us demonstrate for our auditors and also for some of our more security conscious customers that we're taking security seriously, that we're awarding access on a need basis, and that we're keeping track of the reasons why people might have special access. One of the nice things about ratcheting, tightly ratcheting your access to production systems as well, is that if you need to investigate something or demonstrate what access has been made, you've dramatically narrowed the population of times that you need to look at in order to demonstrate that access was being controlled. The last thing that we are able to get with our JIT access is some of our production systems they're network isolated. And so in order to get to them, you need to use Tailscale. For those of you who haven't used Tailscale, it's like a very fancy VPN. And our access in Tailscale is controlled by octagroups. So we're able to use with our JIT access, if you need special Tailscale access, you can request access to a special octagroup. We award the access, you have it, Tailscale instantly assigns you to the right group. You have access to the system in our protected portion of our network. And then when it's all done, it just unwinds itself as the access grant expires.
And we have a question that came in here for you, Geoff. How do you convince engineering teams to use these processes that you're putting in place? They're saying sometimes engineers want to say, give me the access. I know what I'm doing. I don't want to explain myself, is the vibe I'm getting here.
Yeah, that's a good question. We're a pretty collaborative team, so I don't think it was like a really hard pull to get people to use this. I think the situation before was that when we didn't have JIT access, people were at the mercy of how available I was. And if we were in, I don't know, budget season or performance review season, or sometime when I'm doing less engineering and more executive activities, then they might just have to wait. And that's not great. So I think we demonstrated with JIT pretty early on that people would get access to things faster. And I think that alone was really useful. The other thing is, I think we started looking at JIT tools just before we became SOC 2 compliant, but I think people saw how much work it was to become SOC 2 compliant. And I think people, not just engineering, but I think across the org, felt that pain. And I think they wanted to do everything they could to reduce the amount of work for the folks who were thinking about security.
Can you talk us through that a little bit more in terms of before and after? It sounds like you got JIT before SOC 2, so maybe you don't have a before, but how does having something like this in place kind of facilitate or streamline that audit process for you?
Yeah, we are able to show to our auditors and also to our customers that like changes to production infrastructure require 2 people. And that tends to be that's the most common question that I see on a security questionnaire that is like true today that wasn't true in 2018. So in 2018, I, as the CTO, could like jump in and make infrastructure changes without approval, right? And now we have a system where even I get approval from someone else in order to make a change. And it's useful for us in addition. Not only does it like make sure that we have a second person, approving, turning the key before the thing happens, but it also creates a record that we made the change at a certain time, which makes it easier to trace the lineage of the changes through our infrastructure over time.
That sounds like a much better scenario.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
So these are the most common things that we use P0 and just-in-time access for right now. So the first is like we have policy access to various services. So if someone wants to test Translate, they can get access to Translate. If they need to investigate some data in a bucket that's normally not open, they can request access to it. We have some other services that we tighten access on to avoid accidental billing. So CommonLit has a read aloud feature where students can have the text read aloud to them. We synthesized the speech for this with a product called Poly. AWS is an AWS service. And we had a couple times very early in our use of Poly where engineers were like hooked up in testing and they did not realize that they were hooked up in testing. And so they ran up like a couple $100 in speech synthesis charges. We want to avoid that at all costs. So in general, our access to those services where you might incur billable usage are denied, and then you ask for temporary access when you need them. And that tends to work really well for us. We have one requirement in the education market, as well as a SOC 2 requirement, is to have tight separation of data from staging and production. So we don't have any real user data in staging, but we still do restrict access to staging because some of our intellectual property is in those environments. So we've got special access for staging, special access for production, and that's for production that'll end up both being at the like tail scale enhanced access level, as well as the Amazon Web Services credentials to look at admin database. I mentioned before that if people need to make hot fixes for some reason, they get themselves added to a special GitHub team that we have that's authorized to bypass branch protection rules. And then, we're able to escalate privileges in Okta for various cases, including Tailscale. So these are the core cases for us that really drive our JIT access. I would say that the majority of our cases, maybe like 2/3 of them, are just getting access to various AWS groups. But for us, that's most of our infrastructure. So that makes a pretty big deal for us.
Yeah. And Geoff, for people on the line that are at different phases of like starting to think about this problem, some may have a really good sense of where privileged access is. Others might not even know what they don't know yet. How did you get to a place where you had an understanding of what you even needed to do?
Yeah, this is a good question. I think that the migration from not having your policy and access situation under control to having it under control I think it's really easy to do it in a way that makes everyone angry and then increases the sentiment, like Geoff was talking about earlier, for I just need the access, let me do the thing, right? And so one of the things that we did is we ratcheted down access slowly. So we started out with building base policies for engineers, and we gave them pretty broad access. And then we started removing access out service by service. And we tried not to do it like all in one day, because often you wouldn't find the consequences of some of these policies getting tightened until a couple days later or something like that. So I think it's very hard to do fast. But I think that if you are patient and you try to move only a couple things at a time so that you can see the effects of it, you can sort of, as long as you keep moving directionally in the right direction, you end up in a really nice place. I would say the maintenance of our AWS policies in general is like trivial at this point, but I think the path to get there was, many hours of our team, tweaking something, seeing if it worked. And it's so tempting sometimes when these things don't work to, grant access with the star, or, grant access to everything on this service, or all of the policies, or all of the privileges. And you really do find that if you are diligent about naming things and you're diligent about awarding the bare minimum necessary and then seeing what needs to be changed from there, that you really do end up in a good place.
That's super interesting. So it seems like that gradual rollout that you did not only helped in terms of like adoption and reception, but it helped you learn as well the additional policies that you needed in place as people started like requesting escalations and things like that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And when we do our compliance review every month, we actually look back at what was requested. And if we see that anyone requested two things at the same time, we check to see if there's a group that we should be creating for that for a certain task. So for example, if someone needs to work on, we have a process that runs that moves data from an analytics vendor into our Redshift. And in order to do this, it needs access to S3 and Redshift. And so a couple of months ago, we saw someone requesting access to a particular S3 bucket, as well as requesting access to Query Editor and Redshift in order to investigate something. And so now we have a group that we can award that has both those things together. So if someone needs to look into, why is our post-hoc data not being copied into Redshift, they're able to now request those two things together in a single request. And that actually makes it easier for us looking back later to see, was everyone doing the things they were supposed to be doing when they requested access, as opposed to just like I need Redshift request and like I need S3 bucket request. Now we've got a coherent thing that you can request to do that task.
Yeah, that's powerful, because you're like you said, doing your most important thing, which is firming up the security side of things, but you're out thinking the engineering side in terms of adding efficiencies to their processes, or you're proactively getting there, I guess, which is pretty unique, I think, in terms of locking things down and making sure they're secure. You're also able to identify ways to streamline and make things faster for folks.
Yeah, there's still definitely scenarios where people have to request 2 or 3 things in order to get a job done sometimes, but we try to react to the things that are consistently time consuming as opposed to the one-offs. I think it's really easy to drown in one-offs, especially if you're a small team like us.
Yep, that makes sense. Great. Well, I think as to start wrapping up here, we just wanted to talk through, for folks that are, wanting to start to design or roll out some sort of JIT program, or maybe you already have one that you're trying to assess if it's worth, changing your approach, things like that. There's a few metrics here that we like to monitor at P0, just in terms of performance. I think these things will help you not only assess progress and that you're achieving what you want to achieve, but also focus. To Geoff's last point, like you don't want to die on the one-off hill. So what are the most important things that you need to go and tackle to really make a meaningful impact for your business? And I think one of the main themes you'll see in these metrics that we have here are around balancing, like really enabling that developer agility and being a partner to the business in that way, while shrinking your attack surface of these sensitive access paths that exist in your system. Because both are important. Two things can be true, as my parenting book that I'm reading right now is telling me about my child's tantrums. So, you can have the best of both worlds, and you really need to in today's environment. So you can't tell developers to wait a few days because of like the process that you have in place. It's what you need to do to make sure it's secure. You need to secure it and give access, so how can you strike that balance? And then also super importantly is comprehensive coverage. So across all of your production environment, whether you're multi-cloud or hybrid, your databases and SSH access to servers and code repositories, CI/CD, like there's just a prolific amount of systems and tools in place in today's day and age. And you want consistent control across all of those so that it's easier to govern, it's easier to check back. So how can you get as broad a footprint as possible there is something that's really important. And in a similar thread we have on the right here, we've broken out by your workforce, and how to monitor progress in terms of like your users, your engineers versus NHIs. So those pesky service accounts and, more and more so the agents that are popping up in the world. Both are super important. And I'm sure you've heard the numbers. There's way more NHIs out there accessing your systems these days than users, but less so than the number. What matters is that many of them have privileged access, and it's often through static credentials, and that's standing. So how can you lock that down as well? And make sure that on both sides, whether it's your users, NHIs, agents, that you're really having that consistent and thorough approach across the board. Geoff, I'd love for you to jump in anecdotally, like anything that you've seen or insights you'd like to share in this vein.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we've done, one of the reasons I think that JIT has been really popular is that it's been almost all upside for us. So our use of JIT tools has enabled engineers to have more independence. It's enabled us to respond to problems more quickly. I think, the vast majority of ransomware attacks that are being conducted against K-12 institutions are actually being done through vendors. And so we are very cognizant of the fact that we are probably a target. So we invest a lot of effort in trying to make sure that we are not an easy target. And I think having the base access that we've given to people be the narrowest level of access necessary, and then enabling people to quickly and easily escalate has just been popular. It's, the rolling out our first JIT tool was not an uphill climb. It's like a little bit of work, a tiny bit of experimentation, and then we, went right into it. And, it's something that's one of those things where sometimes the trade-offs are you have to do something really bad in order to get something good. And here we just it's almost all good. So it's a it's a nice effect to be able to get extra security, but actually not to really have a lot more friction.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess a soft metric we could add to this list is if your developers aren't, sending you nasty Slack messages
Right.
as often, that's a good indicator as well.
Yeah. So, we've got a small footprint. We've got pretty granular policies. Our audit data collection is pretty easy. So yeah, I think on most of these metrics, it's been pretty easy to demonstrate that it's been an improvement.
Great. Thank you. Okay, just wrapping up here, I think we've talked a lot about this. There's almost two camps that we see at P0 when we get started with customers. They're the ones that have like a pretty strong sense of where they're at, where privilege lies, what they need to extend JIT to as quickly as possible. So they have that short-lived, least privileged, automated access that is really easy when it needs to be escalated to get approvals through, yada, yada. And then there's the camp that like needs some help even getting the visibility that they need to think about how they want to start rolling this out. And this is in line with Geoff's guidance of, you start slow, you learn as you go. I think visibility is a big part as well. And it can be really challenging in these complex environments like we just talked about to even define privilege, much less figure out where it's at. So these are kind of the two groups that we see. And depending on where you're at, you kind of go from there to start shrinking that standing privilege, make sure you have systems in place to continuously validate that nothing is, there's no drift, things like that, comply easily, and then use some of those metrics that we just showed to measure and keep improving as you go. We have an asset that's linked in the attachments side here. That is our path to least privilege. So just a lot of what we talked about today is the practical steps for rolling this out, things to think about. And I'd love to open the floor to any questions from the audience before we wrap up here. Hi, Geoff.
Hello, I'm not here to rush you off, just to help with any questions or anything else I can.
Okay, great. I do see one question here. So someone's saying they don't have homegrown, but they've invested pretty heavily in their PAM solutions, which has been hit or miss in cloud environments. And their question is asking how they can make this kind of, I think they say make it work, probably JIT access with what they have without having to get another tool is essentially the gist here. Geoff, any thoughts there in terms of not adding another tool to the stack? I think everyone can relate to that.
Yeah, I think the two JIT tools that we picked JIT tools in the past on the basis of like them doing JIT and specializing in JIT and not doing a whole lot of other stuff. And part of that for us is driven by the fact that we're on a nonprofit budget, and so we don't have a lot of like room for extra tools. But I do think that this is a scenario where it's cost effective to pick something that's like well suited to the task. So we don't have we don't have like a complicated PAM approach. So I'm like not really in a great position if you've invested a lot in your PAM to like talk about what to do there.
I can jump in a little bit. I think in terms of the cloud gap that was called out specifically, and if you have like maybe like a CyberArk or something that's doing a lot of your on-prem stuff, there's still that agility that's needed in these more dynamic cloud environments. So we have customers that, have both, or customers that are just looking for an entirely new approach that's a little bit more nimble and something that's more flexible for the current state of how their developers are working. But I have some more resources I can send on this topic. So feel free to reach out after the webinar and we can send those over. Okay, great. Any other questions from the audience? Okay.
I would encourage everyone, if you haven't yet, take a look at the attachment section, because there is the document, The Path to Least Privilege, which I think will help you a lot in this.
Thanks, Geoff. Amazing. Well, I appreciate the questions throughout. Geoff, thank you so much for joining and speaking to this subject with us today. And Geoff with a J, thank you so much for hosting us and making space for this conversation. We look forward to the next one.
This was great. Thanks so much.
Thank you both. I want to offer one thing people may not have realized, but there was some Zen wisdom in this webinar today, because what I've heard, and I've heard it before, is the best way to go fast is to go slow. And I heard that twice today. And I think that's really important. So in any case, thank you very much to Kelsey, Geoff, P0, CommonLit, and to you for joining us. To view other webinars, please look in the Identity Defined Security Alliance Bright Talk channel. We always want to get the best and freshest identity security information for you. I'm Geoff Rich, and we'll see you at the next IDSA webinar in our 2025 series soon.